What's up, you guys? Welcome back to my channel. My name is Zoe and I'm super excited today because I'm talking about all of the books that I read in the month of June. It was pretty darn good. I read a total of 9 books in the month of June, which was so much better than May because I only read 4 books in May and it was a horrible reading month. June was so much better. I read a lot of books that I really liked. Overall, there really weren't any books that I hated, so I'm chalking that up to a pretty good reading month. Let's go ahead and just jump in and I'll talk about the books that I read. So I actually buddy read a book with my friend Beck on Instagram at the beginning of June, and I'm really excited to talk about that book because it's actually a reread for me. One of my favorite books of all time, and that was The Loneliest Girl in the Universe. This is by Lauren James, and I love this book so freaking much. I have talked so much about this book on my channel, but if you don't know, this is a book that follows our main character, Romy Silvers, as she is the only passenger on this spacecraft heading to Earth number 2. She's the lone survivor and she's 16 years old. That's pretty much all I like to talk about as far as the book, because I really think that one of the best ways to go into reading this is to not know anything about the story or what takes place. I think that honestly just the setting of this book is what is super appealing. The fact that she is a 16-year-old girl on this spacecraft completely alone is just so intriguing to me, and it was what made me pick up the book in the first place. I was super nervous to reread this because I'm so afraid that I will end up hating the books that I actually love. Like, you say a book is your favorite book of all time, and then over time it starts to feel like, well, maybe it really wasn't, or maybe there were like problematic things, maybe I changed my mind, and then you reread it and you're like, what if I ended up hating it? So super happy to report that this was one of my first rereads in a very long time, and I absolutely loved it even more the second time. Things that I love about this book, I think that it is just never boring. It is so fast paced. There are no lulls. Something is always happening. There's always action, and it just moves so quickly. I personally also really relate to our main character, Romy. She struggles a lot with anxiety, depression, growing up as a 16-year-old by yourself. We also start to learn about some of the traumatic things that she went through as a kid and how that's affected her. Her anxiety feels so similar to mine and what I struggle with. She also doubts herself a lot and her abilities, and I really relate to a lot of her internal dialogue. Just the things that she struggles with. Like, she is so badass, but she doubts herself the whole time, and I find that super relatable. I love that we see her struggle through that and go through things like that. It just makes her a really relatable character. There's also some really solid plot twists at the end where it just like things keep happening that you don't expect to happen, and it just makes the ending so satisfying in my opinion. Overall, this book is so awesome. I think some things that I didn't like, there's some like fanfic that she writes in here, and I'm not a huge fan of when that happens in books, so that's not something that I super enjoyed. I also wish that there were a little bit more flashbacks to things that happened before she became the last person on the ship that like happened more in the beginning of the story. We get a lot of flashbacks towards the end. Overall, I think the story could have been built up a little bit better with flashbacks, but that's super minute compared to everything else I really love about this book. If you have not read this book yet, highly recommend. Still one of my favorites of all time. I think this is going to be a book that I read once a year because it's just so special to me. I love it so much. The next book that I finished in the month of June was Where the Crawdads Sing. This is by Delia Owens. This book takes place around the 1960s. We follow our main character, Kaya, who is also nicknamed the Marsh Girl, who lives in a quiet little town in North Carolina. We learn a lot about how Kaya grows up. We learn a lot about her surroundings. Very poor family situation. A lot of her siblings, her mom and her dad, all end up leaving her when she's like 10 years old, so she really learns how to fend for herself and how to figure things out. She's kind of quiet and reserved. We also start to follow her relationship as she develops 2 different relationships with 2 different boys and how that affects her life. We also follow flash forwards to where she's older and there's a murder mystery that these 2 detectives are trying to solve, and the stories intertwine, and that's a really poor overview, but it's very good, like historical fiction. This is not something that I would have picked up for myself, but we did pick this as our book club pick of the month for last month, so I did read it. There were a couple times I was gonna DNF it, not gonna lie. I'm just not a huge historical fiction fan. Kaya is a very science-y, she really likes biology, she really likes studying the creatures around the marsh, and it just like kind of bored me a little bit at times. Overall though, this story was super satisfying, and I'm really glad that I read it. I totally recommend recommend checking this book out. I thought the ending was really, really well done. I loved Kaya's character. I loved seeing what she went through and her struggles. I feel like I'm not doing this book justice at all. I'm sure there are so many better reviews out there, but the overall consensus is that this was a really great book. No regrets reading it. I still would recommend that people read it, but I don't foresee myself rereading this book at all. And during the reading process, I didn't really enjoy myself. It wasn't that entertaining, but I don't regret reading this book. That's such a weird feeling to be left with, because usually it's like I really enjoy the book or I really don't, and then I DNF it, but it's like I didn't really like it, but it was satisfying. The ending was satisfying, and the fact that I read it was satisfying. So I still recommend it. Really, really great book. Objectively, this is a 4.5 star read. It is so good. Enjoyment-wise, probably 2.5. The next few books that I read, I actually read for the Buzzword-a-thon round number 4 that took place this last month, and the buzzword was the word you. So all of these books have you in the title. I did vlog my reading week, so I'll link that vlog down below if you want to check it out. I've already talked about all of these, so I'm kind of gonna skim over them semi-quickly. The first book that I read during the Buzzword-a-thon was The Way You Make Me Feel by Maureen Gu, and I really liked this book a lot. This is a really perfect summer contemporary. If that's your kind of thing, totally recommend this. We follow our main character Clara as she is kind of a troublemaker, rebellious, class clown kind of character. She's in her junior year of high school. She pulls a prank and the prank goes haywire, and for punishment she has to work on her dad's food truck for the summer, and she meets some new friends along the way, and we follow her family dynamics and her friendship dynamics, and she grows a lot, which I really, really loved. I think one of the things that I loved the most about this book was her character development. I really liked Clara as a character. There were some times where I was like, girl, you're crazy, what are you doing? But I loved seeing how her story played out. I loved reading about her observations, and just her growth overall as a character was really fun to read about. Also, it was just entertaining, cute, fluffy, but in a really good way. Lots of really cool different family dynamics throughout, so really, really enjoyed this one. I did give it a 4 out of 5 stars. The next book that I read for Buzzword-a-thon was a manga, and that was Kimi to Doki From Me to You. This book is kind of funny. It follows the story of a girl who looks like a character out of a horror movie. She's really like tall and thin and has straight black hair, and everyone in her class thinks that she's cursed, and that like if you talk to her or if you look at her, if she stares at you, that she's cursing you, and so everyone's kind of afraid of her. Of course, there's one boy in class who's not afraid of her and who talks to her, and when he talks to her, he kind of gives her the little inspiration and encouragement she needs to start branching out a little bit more, becoming less shy, clearing up those misunderstandings about her being able to curse people. Overall, it was fine. I didn't love this. I think I could get into the rest of the series, but as like a first book, it didn't really grab my attention. It felt like the same plot kept happening through all of the chapters, if that makes sense. So it just kind of got boring and predictable after a while. I think manga is kind of supposed to be like that, so I wasn't like shocked that I didn't super enjoy it, but overall it just wasn't my favorite manga. I did go ahead and give it 2 out of 5 stars. The next book that I read is If You Come Softly. This is by Jacqueline Woodson. This is a middle grade book that follows the story of 2 high school kids, Ellie, who is white and Jewish, and then Jeremiah, who is black, and they fall in love, start this relationship, and that's really what it's about. How them being an interracial couple plays into their families, what their families think, what their friends think, and there's a lot of dialogue in this book that happens about that. That is one reason I did enjoy it. I think this is a really important story. I think that this is a really great book to read in high school or middle school. I think that it needs to be talked about and discussed. It was kind of weird like reading it by myself and not being able to talk about it with someone. Overall, I'm not a huge fan of in middle grade books where the younger protagonists are speaking as if they are very mature for their age. It's hard for me to suspend my disbelief when the conversations that they're having are just conversations that like 50-year-olds would have. It doesn't make sense in my brain when you're a high schooler. Like, you're not really thinking about a lot of social justice issues and like political stances, and some of the conversations that they were having were just too mature, I think, for their age. And so for that reason, I was just kind of like, okay. Didn't love my time reading this. Again, I think it's a very important book. I understand why people do like it. Overall, it wasn't my taste. It wasn't for me. And so for that reason, I did give this 2 out of 5 stars as well. The next book that I read for Buzzword-a-thon was There's Someone Inside Your House. This is by Stephanie Perkins, and this is a YA thriller, less mystery, more thriller. We follow the story of some high school students as there is a serial killer going around and killing their classmates in really kind of brutal ways. In particular, we follow one girl who also has kind of a sketchy backstory history that we're not really quite sure of as readers until towards the end of the book, and then her relationship with this other character who also seems kind of sketchy. So basically everyone in this book just seems suspicious. Things I liked about this book is that it was entertaining. It wasn't hard to get into the story. It wasn't hard to figure out the mystery. That also might be a reason why someone didn't like it. It's really not that big of a mystery. A lot more just pure entertainment. If you've seen the movies Scream, that's 100% what it reminded me of. I actually really enjoyed my time reading this. I listened to the audiobook and I just flew through it. I wanted to know who did it. I wanted to know what would happen next. I wanted to know the ending. I totally recommend going into this book without any expectations. Don't go into it thinking it's going to be the best mystery thriller you ever read. Go into it just because you want to be entertained. I've never read anything else by Stephanie Perkins and I enjoyed it. Straightforward writing, not like the best book I've ever read by far. So for that reason, I did go ahead and give it 3.5 out of 5 stars. And the last book that I read for Buzzwordathon was Everything I Never Told You by Celeste Ng. So this book jumps in following the story of a family who just finds out that their daughter is found dead. And there's a mom and a dad, 2 siblings that are then affected by her death, and we followed the aftermath of her death. Sort of a mystery of like what happened, and then also we see flash forwards to what kind of led to this situation. This is 100% like a literary fiction that is extremely character driven. So if you are wanting something that really takes a peek into someone's life and to a family's lives and kind of explores their actions and why they are the way they are, if you're someone who really wants to read something that is super character driven and why they do what they do, why they said what they said, all of their actions and everything in between, I definitely recommend this. But if you're someone like me who definitely prefers something a little bit more action packed, that's definitely not this. I think that this is an important story and I think that it's a hard hitting story. It'll definitely make you feel some things, but I'm not gonna lie, overall I was really bored reading this book. And I feel so bad saying that because after I read it, I went on Goodreads and I looked at so many people's reviews and they were like, oh, this is so hard hitting and this was so well done and super well written because it's Celeste Ng and it is written beautifully. But I think this is just something that you really have to be in the mood for and you have to know it's character driven going in, and I was not prepared for that. So for that reason, I really did not like this book. I did not enjoy my time reading this book and I did give it 1 out of 5 stars. Don't hate me, it just wasn't fun. I will say that I did read Little Fires Everywhere by Celeste Ng and I loved that book. So I don't know. Everything I Never Told You was just not for me. The next book I read in the month of June was Gemina. This is Illuminae Files #2 by Jay Kristoff and Amy Kaufman. And this is the continuation of the Illuminae Files trilogy. Extremely sci-fi. I'm sure so many of you already know what this is really about. The first one is right here. These books are not small, but what's really cool about them is that it's stories told in like files and chats and emails and surveillance video footage. So it makes the reading process a lot easier. I mean, I could fly through like 100 pages of this book, no problem. It's really hard to talk about what this book is about. Sci-fi, we're on a spaceship following political issues where towards the beginning of the book, some terrorists come in and hold people hostage and try to take over the spacecraft. And so we follow some characters that are trying to work against that. And it's very, very action-packed. Not at all like Everything I Never Told You. It's straight action the whole time, so super fast-paced, super fun to read. I will say, and this just could be me because it's tough for me to get into sci-fi, but I don't really enjoy reading like the surveillance footage reports, which is where a lot of the text is. I really prefer the emails and the chats and the conversations between the characters, and then when it gets to the surveillance footage, I just kind of blank out a little bit. I know that that's where they're developing like a lot, they're explaining like what's happening, but I just didn't really like it. I will also say there's so much jargon in these books. Stuff that like I don't even know what the heck they're talking about when it comes to like weird sciencey spacecraft sci-fi things. I have no clue. And what you have to do is you have to really push past that and just read it and just keep going. Don't try and figure out everything that they're talking about, and you can really enjoy yourself. If you are trying to figure that stuff out, I think you're gonna have a much more difficult time reading these books. I don't love it, didn't hate it. I guess I really didn't think about how I felt after I read this. I just kind of was like, okay, that's done. Next. I think I enjoyed my time reading it, but I liked the first one better. And I don't know if that's the consensus overall, like a lot of people do or not, but liked the first one better. I've heard the third one is really good. I'm not quite sure if I'm going to continue, but I did finish this beast. So I'm going to go ahead and say I gave this one 3 out of 5 stars. I have one final book to talk about, and I'm super excited to talk about it because I really liked it, and that was Final Girls by Riley Sager. So we follow the story of our main character, Quincy Carpenter, who, when she was a college student, went on a vacation with 5 friends, and during the vacation, a serial killer murderer came into the cabin and killed all of her friends, but she was a survivor. So she's called a final girl, which follows that concept of if you survive this mass murder, that you are a final girl, you survived a killing, and there's 2 other women in the United States at the time that are also called final girls, and it is about kind of their story. Early on in the book, we find out that one of the 3 final girls is found dead, and that really spirals a lot of things out of control. The 2 remaining final girls kind of spark this weird friendship. There's lots of mystery, there's lots of intrigue, there's just so many twists that happen in this book. I freaking loved it. I have not enjoyed a mystery thriller like this in a really long time. I think this is easily one of my new favorite mystery thrillers. I definitely wasn't super surprised at the ending, but I really loved the way that it was drawn out. I loved the way that it was told. I thought that Riley Sager just did a brilliant job of telling this story. I did read The Last Time I Lied by Riley Sager last month, and I liked this one so much more. It was just so intriguing. Again, Riley Sager tells the story with flashbacks, so we see what happened at the cabin when she was a college student, and then flash forward to her time now and what's happening, and it was just so dang good. I really liked this. I feel like I talked about it really poorly, but I super recommend it. It is a little scary, so if you're frightened easily, probably not for you. It was kind of on par with Gillian Flynn, like Dark Places, pretty dark. So if you're scared easily, I don't recommend it, but if you're looking for something fun and twisty and a little scary, I recommend it because it was freaking good. I went ahead and gave this one 5 stars. I really liked it, and I love that I have a new mystery thriller on my shelf. So those are all of the books that I read in the month of June. I had a really great reading month. I can't believe that June is already done. It flew by. I had some awesome reads, some pretty meh reads, but overall, I'll chalk that up to a great reading month. I really enjoyed my time reading this last month. You guys should let me know in the comments what your favorite book was that you read in the month of June. I really like to know. I love asking this question because you guys always end up giving me really good recommendations, and so please tell me what your favorite book was that you read in the month of June. And that's all I got. I hope that you guys have a wonderful rest of your day wherever you are, and I will see you soon in my next video. Bye!